Okay, and you're live.
Brilliant. Welcome, lovely humans and aliens, if you're watching, which I really hope you are. Before we begin, I just want to share some basic housekeeping to keep everyone watching at home enabled you to enjoy the evening and engage positively in the discussions we're going to have. This is Glasgow 2024 presents Eat My Speculative Shorts. And you probably will have lots of questions as we go through. If you're in the webinar, that's the Zoom, could you please put them in the Q&A box? You may comment and chat with each other in that box as well, but I do recommend please follow our 2024 Code of Conduct, which in brief, we operate a zero tolerance policy. We're on racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, etc. And anyone who behaves inappropriately in any of the chats, whether it's YouTube or Zoom, will be removed. We operate a one strike and you're out policy, and you can read the full Glasgow 2024 Code of Conduct on our website at glasgow2024.org/about/code of conduct. If you Google it, I'm sure it will pop up. Again, if you're joining us via YouTube, please add any questions you've got as we go along into the comments. They will be relayed into our Q&A session. We might answer them as we go along, depending on how relevant they are to what we're talking about. We might hold some of them until the end, but we'll see. We try and keep things quite loose and calm and casual. If you are live tweeting today, please use the hashtag Glasgow 2024. That enables us to pick things up and also retweet your wonderful thoughts. So, welcome to Eat My Speculative Shorts. Speculative short fiction is a booming industry, but do we show it the love it deserves? I'm never quite sure myself. Are short stories a stepping stone for novels or a career in their own right? Is the TikTok generation a boon or a curse for shorts? Do publishers show enough support for shorts? And I am delighted to be here today with David Gullen, Anna Sun, and Kenechi Udogu, and I am going to let them introduce themselves. We'll go around the room, starting with whoever's on the top left of my screen, which is Kenechi. So
Hi.
Tell us about yourself and why you're here.
Hi, all right. I'm Kenechi Udogu, and I am a fantasy sci-fi writer. I've been writing for, I don't know, over 30 years, but I just always been drawn towards fantasy and sci-fi, so I've just carried on doing that mostly. I have had one of my short stories, which is actually fantasy, longlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Competition, or Prize rather. And I've also had my short story in Dark Matter magazine, published last year, one of the issues published last year. And I just write books and short stories. Yeah.
Excellent.
I live in London. Yeah, you go.
And as an addendum, I've been given permission to share this, but Kenechi's just been signed to a book deal for her Cli-Fi YA with Faber. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's move on to Dave. You're next on my screen.
John, you never said we were going to do this, but anyway.
I'm a joker, I know, I'm sorry.
like Kenechi, I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer. I've been telling stories all my life. I'm looking back at my successes and otherwise, I'm primarily a short story writer. I've won prizes. I've abysmally failed to sell certain other stories. I've been doing this for, I don't know, 40 years. It's what I do. I might not be very good at it, but it's who I am.
I don't know. You sound pretty good at it to me, Dave, from, looking at your resume.
I am exceptionally good at it. British.
We're very stoic. And last but not least, Anna.
Hello, everyone. I feel like I'm the representative new writer on this panel. I've been writing a long time, but into sort of not in science fiction and fantasy until really recently. I want to say like pre-lockdown time. But I've been published since 2020. So I guess, yeah, I'm relatively new. My short story Dandelion Brew in Dreamforge was nominated last year for Utopia Awards. So I think I'm going somewhere very slowly.
Oh, I think very glad fantastic. Yeah. And I have had the privilege of reading at least one of each of your stories. So I'm very happy to say you're all really good writers, and I've really enjoyed what you've written so far. So I'm looking forward to more in the future. And yeah, I suppose that leaves me. My name's John Allen. I write the fiction under the pen name of J.W. Allen. I also love short stories, particularly speculative, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, kind of my wheelhouses. I've been longlisted for the James White Award. I've been, oh God, what else is? Yes, I've been published in Dark Matter magazine for a speculative horror a couple of years ago. And I won the Corencon 2022 prize for my very, very grim dystopian short, which I now can't remember the name of, which is really embarrassing. But basically, yes, like the rest of our lovely panelists, I love short fiction. I love telling stories. I really enjoy reading them, and they make a nice break from, you know, more long form work. Brilliant. Right, let's dive straight in, shall we? I found a really fun quote from the Writing Cooperative, which was published in June 2022, which might help guide our question. Why do people read speculative fiction? Well, they say speculative fiction allows readers to explore different possibilities and ask questions about the world around them. It allows writers to take on bigger themes and ideas without being limited by the constraints of reality. So that leads me nicely onto our first question. Why do we love and write speculative shorts? And I'm going to go the other way around. Anna.
I don't know. I feel like this is one of those questions where I can only speak for myself. And I mean, I actually was a very late comer to speculative fiction, mostly because when I was born in Asia and I grew up there, and the exposure that I had was very limited because the stories we had sort of culturally were, mostly for me, ghost stories, a lot of ghost stories and urban folk tales. It's a very spiritual place where I grew up, and very badly dubbed Japanese anime that has giant robots. And that was my entry into speculative fiction, to be honest with you. I didn't actually get to reading it until much later in my teenagehood. So I don't know. I feel like I might have a... but what I do love about it is just that sort of... it just pushes the boundaries, and I feel like it's one of those types of literature genres that sort of just helps us imagine. It's for us, it's two parts to it. It's that it seeds, right? The more you read, the more you can get creative and sort of stretch beyond the boundaries of reality and just bend the light a little bit.
Yeah, Dave.
I think your quote says it all. In many respects, but as a writer, of course, I've always got something else to say, and I completely agree with Anna. I can really only speak for myself, but maybe other people will find some resonance with my answers. A lot of children's fiction is fantastical: talking bears, flying cars, mysterious islands, and my introduction to story was having those stories read to me and then reading them myself. And once I started, I didn't stop. And it made me wonder why, to digress, why some people stop reading fantastical fiction, because that's the origin. That's how we're introduced to story, with this imaginative form of storytelling. I could go on, but I won't.
No, go on. It's fine. I need to grab my mouse, so please go on.
I just wondered why people do it. I mean, there's definitely an element in growing up where you turn against the things that you loved as children because you believe yourself are no longer children and you want to prove that you're different. And I just thought maybe that's it. But anyway, over time I became at least as interested in telling stories as reading them. I started off, my stories were very ideas driven. But I've become, without wanting to sort of sound a bit pretentious, more sort of philosophically driven in my storytelling. I want to try and understand things about life, about how the world or the universe fits together, and how I can hold a mirror up to it, which is, I think, is why that quote is so good, because that's saying exactly that. You can write about big themes and ideas about being limited to the culture that you're writing into. And also, more recently, where do I kind of stand? What's my opinion about myself in this world? And where do I go with that? I've said enough.
Okay. Kenechi.
Right. So for me, I guess speculative fiction has always been part of my life, because when I grew up in Nigeria. I'm Igbo, and most of our folk laws are actually about, you know, turtle doing something and then going up to heaven and doing. So it's always been a little bit fantastical. Like, it's always been there from all the stories I was told as a child, and it's just something that had never left me. In terms of just the idea that you can explore something that just doesn't make sense, and then you can make it make sense by writing about it. And actually, it doesn't always have to make sense, as long as you get out of it, you get some enjoyment out of it. And I've always liked, you know, things to do with casting spells, or actually time travel, things, you know, just things that push the boundary. And, you know, sci-fi in a sense obviously could happen at some point in the very far future. But I just like the idea that we can think outside of the, you know, the box that we've, you know, life creates for us. So, yeah.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And you've all said things that resonate with me as well. I mean, why do I write them, read them? Partly, I'm a bit lazy sometimes when it comes to reading. I love novels, and I do read them avidly, usually before I go to bed, and then I fall asleep. A short story gives me a little bit more of like a bite-sized chunk of a new world. And yeah, as you've all mentioned, holding a mirror up to our own, and also writing them, I consider quite a challenge, because if I can tell a good story in a very short space of time, I think that serves me well when I try longer form work as well, because, you know, I think we must have all heard the same phrase at some point, kill your darlings. It really has taught me to just chop out anything that I don't need. You know, if it takes me 12 pages to start a story, I've probably failed. And when it comes to speculative, Anna, you really made me laugh with the Japanese anime translations, because I grew up on watching those as well. And yeah, they are fun, and I still watch them, and I still enjoy them. And my friend is a massive graphic novel fan, so I still read all of those. Sorry, comic books / graphic novels. I still read all of those, and they are wacky and fun, and not just the usual superhero tropes either. Before we go any further, as an example of speculative shorts, I now invite you, if you want, to share a short passage of one of a chosen story that you'd like to share with our lovely audience. Dave, do you have something you want to just quickly read?
I do. It's only a couple of hundred words, and it's the opening of my current work in progress, which is called Along the God Road. And this is the introduction to part 1, which is City of Flesh. A restlessness builds in the city when the end is near. Scouts are sent out, then war bands. Quiet schisms become vocal, strident. The scholarly debates of a generation past are now knife fights in the taverns and alleyways. On one such uncertain day, Myxini priests celebrate the dedication of their final temple to the universal solitary, the creator above. Lucas Anna, adopted scion of the opposing Aganathans, reluctantly makes his way along Great Heart Road towards the sounds and aromas of festival. He doesn't want to go. He knows he doesn't belong, but by convention, all are welcome, and he is very hungry. For now, he tells himself he still has standards and refuses to gnaw upon the walls. Charancho, his closest friend, is there too. Thank the good gods. They have shared in each other's malt fests and are sworn as one. She watches the Myxini guards with that quiet smile of hers. Her first hand rests on the hilt of the long knife, scabbarded on the harness wrapping her shoulder and belly plates. It is a long, narrow and sharp-tipped godbone blade, made for mischief, made for slipping between the overlap of throat scales or side plates. It has seen some use.
Thank you. What made you choose that one in particular?
I just thought I'd write something that was, you know, current. And I thought work in progress was the best thing to go for.
Yeah. Is that one have you been working on that for long, or?
I've been not working on it for quite a long time recently, because of reasons. But a few months.
Yeah.
It's going to be quite a long story, quite a long short story.
Food for thought. Thank you for sharing. Anna, do you have anything you'd like to share briefly?
Yes, I would like to read you the opening of Against the Time Beast, which was published back in December. And it's a flash, actually. So even a few hundred words, you probably get you about a third way through the story. It's actually a short flash in for me. Yeah, I'll read it first and then we can talk about it, I suppose. Sometimes the future hinges on a whisker of a moment, as if time were a wild animal, that wait in the air as seconds prowl past. I smell it on your breath as you curl and uncurl your fists, left, then right, then left again. The harsh fluorescent light inside the underground car park forms a halo around your head. Outside, the blue, red, green neons blink, heaven's pool parlor, on and off again, throwing colors on your trademark white t-shirt over blue jeans, plain white, so no one could see your wings. No one, except for me. We stand 1 foot in, 1 foot out, hovering on the boundary between the silent field guzzlers and the streetlight polluted night, loitering in that folded dimension between a promise and a lie, an impossible origami. I handle the pool cue I'd swiped from upstairs. It's smooth, straight, all the things I'm not. But I could be deadly with this, just as you could be lethal with that tiny cube of billet chalk I saw you slip into your pocket. All the same, I doubt you'd make the first move. You've always been that angel, steadfast, true, unwavering. Me? I've transgressed once too often, fallen twice too many, my wings long since clipped. Guess I might be adding another line to my ledger of sins.
Thank you. Yeah. And well read too, both of you. We spoke about this before we came on. Kenechi and I are not going to read, mainly because we hate the sound of our own voices. So we're not going to do that. But yeah, no, I think it was an interesting exercise to do, especially at the start of this, to demonstrate. I think the evocative power short fiction, particularly speculative short fiction, can have of drawing you in extremely quickly. I find it fascinating that 9 times out of 10, I read a lot of novels where I wish, oh, the story had started on page 20. Why didn't you start it on page 1? And that's why I love speculative shorts. So thank you both. Anna, what made you decide to write that one? Inspiration.
The writing. It was one of those where I was lucky enough that I had that first line and I go like, okay, where is this story going to go? The first line being, sometimes the future hinges on the whisker of a moment as if time were a wild animal. And that just came out. I was like, let's follow this. Let's see what happens. And it was one of those where it became a story around entropy and what it means for relationships. I mean, I come from writing poetry, so actually like stretching myself to write 5,000 words was a big fear in the beginning. So Yeah.
Try 50,000. That's an even bigger fear.
Exactly. And I think the longest fiction piece I did manage to write was just over 7,000, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of words. But anyhow, that's how a poet thinks.
Do you know what? I've never tried. Well, no, correction. I did try poetry a long time ago. I've just never got back to it. So it's perhaps another tool to think about. Brilliant. Thank you all so much for sharing. Don't worry, audience, no more readings, we promise. I would now like to ask a question of all of us that gets asked at some point or another when it comes to speculative short fiction. Do we view speculative shorts, any of us, as a gateway drug to what I call the Class A marathon amphetamine of speculative novels? Specifically, after trying to write them. Kenechi?
Yeah, I could go with this one because I think I came to writing short stories the other way around personally. I thought I would write novels first, and I used to write long pieces. And I think actually, John, where I met you a long time ago, let's not think about how long ago that was. It's like,
but look, still looks so young and vibrant.
We met in a writing group, and that was one of the first places where I actually started to write short stories. And then I realized that in their own right, they were actually quite interesting and you could tell a whole story in 500 words or 1,000 words, or even 5. But from my point of view, I wouldn't say that it is necessarily the gateway. I would say it's a tool to help someone like me fine-tune my longer pieces, because I actually personally would rather write a long novel. And just because I feel like I could put a lot more into it and I can build a lot more out of it. But I do love writing the short stuff. So if you can create a world in 1,000 words and you make it concrete, then you can create a longer piece of work that is authentic and it's snappy and does all the right things. As you said, you wouldn't start the story on page 20 because it's almost like you have little short stories in a long piece. So it can be the gateway to novels, but it could go hand in hand, which is what I'm trying to do.
I think I wanted to ask that because to me, I when we go to conventions and stuff, I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, short stories. I use them to when I get bored of something I'm stuck on." And the more I've learned about, particularly in speculative markets, is some people just love writing speculative shorts. I mean, Dave, you mentioned it yourself. I mean, how do you feel about this?
I think very yes and no. I agree with a lot of what Kenechi said. They're very different animals. Short stories and novellas and novels are things in their own right, and you need to write in different ways to write well in each form. I think short stories are a good way to experiment with style, to make some mistakes, to work out what your voice is going to be. But that doesn't get away from the fact that a short story as a form is a complete thing and isn't subservient to any other form of storytelling. When I started, which is a long time ago, the general advice was that you should start with short stories because this is how you find your feet, and then once you've become good at them, then you start writing novels. I don't know that kind of works in the modern era. I don't know how many people do that or think that's a sensible idea. It seems that to me that mainstream publishing is much hungrier for like the instant best new thing, and will just constantly move on from one to the next, to the next, to the next. I don't think that's in good service of debut novelists. But maybe that's drifting away from the point a bit.
No, it's fine. We love to digress here. That's okay. The point.
Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say.
Yeah. You picked up on something, actually. It's a quote I found this afternoon when I had 5 minutes to spare. It was from The Guardian, actually, which for anyone who doesn't live in the UK, The Guardian's one of the national newspapers / online journals here in the UK. It's quite renowned, particularly in literary circles. And they don't really talk about speculative fiction much at all. And if they do, it's usually in long form. But it was from Miranda Bryant on Sunday, the 30th of January. I pulled this quote out. She said, "Such is the apparent appetite for short stories that a new independent press entirely dedicated to them, believed to be the first of its kind in the UK," and it's that line that really got my attention, is to launch in March. And then it goes on to talk about Scratchbooks' first publication, etc., etc. And it was that one line, believed to be the first of its kind in the UK. And I was like, well, hang on a minute. I know loads of speculative publications, independent and otherwise, who've been around for quite a long time, like Dave, Newcon Press sprung to mind.
Absolutely.
And on this subject of speculative, do you think in speculative short fiction, actually the market here is probably several times ahead of where literary markets are in short form?
I don't think, I mean, can I just say quickly in riposte to that comment, Granter? What about Granter? You know,
Granter, yes.
If you're only thinking about literary writing, because, you know, obviously genre writing isn't proper writing. That's a well-known fact. But yeah, Granter has been doing that for decades.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why your comments have just resonated with me, because I just sometimes I don't understand. I always feel like speculative markets, sometimes they're huge. You know, we all know how big they are across the world: Canada, Australia, the States, Asia, China. And yet in mainstream circles, they're not, well, I don't feel they're talked about enough considering their popularity. And I do wonder is there something in speculative fiction itself that people are afraid to, I don't know, address or examine in closer detail? Because we talk about speculative fiction. I'll go back to the writing cooperative. You know, it can, you know, it allows writers to take on bigger themes and ideas without being limited by the constraints of reality. But the riposte from the literary side or another side would be, well, you know, any story is bending reality. Whereas I disagree. Do you agree with me? Did that make sense at all? Or did I just go off down a little rabbit hole of my own?
I think the conversations between literary and other genres is a rabbit hole I don't particularly want to go down right now.
No, fair enough. Anna, what do you think about this? Speculative shorts as a gateway drug to novels?
Oh, goodness me. I actually, now that we talked about it, I did realize that I did draft a novel a long time ago. And I actually tried that before I tried actually speculative shorts. I've just forgotten about it. Whoops.
Was it that bad?
One of the thing yeah, it was one of those that I will never see the light of day.
The experience, not the novel.
No. The experience. Well, yeah, I like the experience. I think it's the other way around. The experience is fine. The novel isn't. I'm just gonna like zero over, like, like delete, but zero over the drive part where that document lives. So what's interesting for me was in my struggle with writing really has to do with just like a work-life balance thing. And for me, writing short form and just writing at all was very much like a prototype of how I might fit writing alongside all the commitments I have in my life. And it's just easier to do it short form than it is to think like longer form at this stage anyway. That might change as I get more confident. Yeah. So for me, it is very much around learning how I write, as in the actual process of writing, but also to improve the craft, which is something that we probably don't spend enough time talking about. And I find that short fiction has been immensely helpful in just building up my confidence. Maybe that's a good way to put it. But no, I do. I have plans for longer work, but I think in my head I'm just going to have to convince myself that they're actually just like really short things that you tag together and it becomes a long thing. So I've got I'm not going to be afraid of 70,000 words instead of 700.
I'm just going to pick up on something Anna said actually about building up confidence, because I stopped writing for a while just because of life. And I got back in, well, John knows this again, but I got back into it a few years ago, partly because of short stories. So I was, in my mind, I said, if you're going to do something short. And I was able to then, actually, that was the book that got or the story that got longlisted. So there you go. But I hadn't written in a long time, and my brain just went, you don't want to write a full novel because that's 80,000 words or however long it's going to be. And this is a 2,000 word competition. Go for it. And in a way, so that kind of brought me back to my love of what I actually thought I had forgotten a little bit. So yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's, everything both of you just said resonates a little bit with me. I've ping-ponged back from speculative shorts to longer speculative. It's always speculative fiction, and it's usually when I've got stuck. It's usually when life stuff has got in the way. You know, balancing multiple day jobs around the writing as well, But then it was only after I ping-ponged back to short fiction, I think my longer form started to get better, because I was kind of, it's not self-teaching, but I was being taught. And I'm going to come on to craft a little bit, Anna, because you have just raised something that I do want to chat about, because I found it's made me better as a writer for longer form by doing shorter stories, because I just don't have time to waste. I've got to get this done in 2,000, 3,000, sometimes 7,000 words, or in my case, sometimes 12,000 words when it really shouldn't be that long. But yeah, the craft question, I feel for me, speculative shorts have really helped me hone my craft. Anna, you've already touched on this. Is there anything else on craft you'd like to add here on this matter? Because I'm curious how it might have helped you develop your own.
Oh, goodness me. I think I think about it as like prototyping to some degree, like in a way of, so I you know, we're all taught the sort of the 3-act, have your sort of story building up to a climax and sort of the last of the story type structure, which is quite common. I feel like just being able to, and you know, it's a short space of time that you can experiment to fit the story in the way you tell the story. You can experiment telling the same story in different ways in a short amount of time to find the best way to tell it. And it just felt like just a great little tool for an experiment, and for me, building confidence in writing stories in different ways. So before I invest like a lot, well, actually, you know, seeing my friends in different sort of parts of the writing community, you can spend 5 years writing a novel and you don't know at the end how confident you are that it might be working or not. Whereas I feel like if you want to experiment that in the short form, you have that confidence quicker about what might work for you and the way you want to tell the story, and makes it much more viable to do something longer form afterwards.
Yeah. Anything to add on that, Dave, Kenechi, or have we covered all that really?
I'm just thinking, yes, I agree with everything that's been said there. And
I was hoping for some disagreement from at least one of us somewhere.
I've got two thoughts, one of which I'm not sure if I can articulate, but the first one is, I think the problem of launching straight in as someone new to writing into a very long form story is that your writing is going to change radically as you go through that book. So you're either going to have to massively rewrite it probably again and again, which is risking you are then locked into writing the same thing for maybe 15 years. Or you'll get to the end of the book and realize, on the one hand, you probably didn't want to write that book in the first place. And on the other hand, your style is now so different at the very end than the stuff right at the beginning you're totally unhappy with. And you're then in that position of saying, well, it's really good by the time you get to chapter 10, which of course is useless. I think short stories do teach you a lot. And as you've been saying, about how to write in a very compact way. I sometimes think that novels are actually a whole series of short story scenes you can write as a short story. You have an entrance, you have development, you have something happens, you have resolution, and then you write another scene. And I mean, looking back, I realize I've done these things. I don't think I'm a very intuitively self-aware person about what I do in my own brain. It's just that I look back over about a period of 5 or 10 years and think, oh yeah, that's what I've been doing, that's what I've been learning. And if only I knew that right at the beginning, I could have done that in 18 months. But I never did. It's for me, it's a slow process, but it never ends, which is also good.
Sounds like we almost see it almost as a time saver, an investment in the long run rather than a quick stop on the way to bigger things.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. That's given me food for thought, certainly. I've got when I was thinking about this on this panel, this is something that really came to mind, particularly as I've started reading as much as I can, especially in the last 3 years. We are a global community. I think it is easy to become a little bit lost in the English as a first language markets. So do any of you have favorite speculative shorts that you've read as a translation or in another language, or any authors that you want to recommend to our panel and to our audience? And
yes.
Go. Yeah, I was going to say, hands up. I don't mind who goes first here.
Okay, I'll go first. I really like stories in translation, and I also like stories in English written by people who write in English for who English is not their first language. The way they use language is different. It intrigues me. They put words and structures together in ways which I would never have even thought of, and it can be really beautiful. Favorite stories, I don't know, maybe they're like itches you can't stop scratching. They're kind of memories, and they haunt me. And one of the very earliest ones is one called "Take Me Down the River" by Sam Lundvall, who's a Swedish writer, and it's from an anthology of international science fiction called 20 Houses of the Zodiac. And I found I'd forgotten all of this until I checked on its origins, and it's from 1979 Worldcon.
Oh wow! So quite a while ago.
Quite a while ago, but it also tells you that efforts to engage with and spread the work of non-English language writers has been going on for quite a long time. But anyway, I adore this story. It's a gentle love letter. It's got its own myth structure. There's a whole world. It's got this sort of bittersweet melancholy that just never faded away. And every time I read it, it just leaves me looking sort of wistfully out the window into this other world. Very inspirational story. It's clearly very personal to me, and I don't know why, but it's just a wonderful story, and I love it.
Yeah. Can you repeat the title again? Because I think I missed it.
It's called "Take Me Down the River" by Sam Lundvall.
Take Me Down the River by Sam Lundvall. It's
from 20 Houses of the Zodiac is the anthology. And apparently most of the stories there have never been reprinted anywhere else. So track it down.
Oh, well.
If you can. It's a good anthology. Really nice.
Anna, Kenechi, do you have any favourites that you like and that you've really enjoyed?
I was going to say no, not really, because I tend to read mostly English written material. And actually, I don't. I might have read the translation, but I wouldn't consciously have, checked it was a translation, because obviously read, widely. So if you're not an English speaker, it's obviously been translated. So I don't actually recall any specifics.
No, it's fine. I'm just curious.
Actually, just on the topic of international short stories, there's a lot of African short stories out there, but anthologies, I think more recently, there are a lot more anthologies from African writers, speculative fiction, which I find really encouraging, because, it's just a different point of view. Everything's not, it's not about white witches and, all the spells that are cast in Europe. And And it's quite interesting to read this kind of fiction.
Yeah.
Because even though it's, as I said, it's in English, but it's a very different take on what we would call speculative and what it will call specifically horror as well. So yeah.
I'll keep an eye out for those. Anna, do you have any that you really enjoy?
I guess maybe it's more similar to Kenechi, that I don't very much make that distinction. Maybe because for me, also what Dave's point, for me, is not just like English or non-English translation, because there are plenty. As a child of a former British colony, and English being probably my third language or something like that. There's several languages in the stack for me in my head. It was there's also this thing where culturally difficult concepts to translate to English makes for interesting challenges enough as it is. And so I had to look around and in this question to think about what I actually do read. I realized that I read fewer translated shorts than I read like long form and poetry in other from other languages. So, for example, like currently I'm rereading Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, which everybody loves. I read French, so I'm reading Desnos in French. The thing that actually has been, this is a funny one. I'm starting to read a story, a book. I don't know if you call this autobiographical, because so it's a writer called San Mao, who is famous for lyrics of a song called The Olive Tree. That was a hit in the late 1970s and embraced very much by the Chinese diaspora. So, for example, she was an author who traveled from, she was originally from Taiwan. I think I'm not getting my history straight, so somebody's going to correct me now. But I think they grew up in Taiwan, but they ended up in the with a Spanish husband and traveling around the Sahara. So the book I'm reading is actually an English translation, Stories of the Sahara, because I just can't read Chinese. And I wish I could. So this particular song, for example, that I just mentioned was interesting because the original poem that was based on was written in English. So she wrote in a poem in English that became a Chinese song. And hence, so, that's this kind of, I think what I'm most interested in is that crossover because it's closest to my own personal experience. So rather than just a pure translation, I'm interested in the kinds of stories that sort of fall a little bit between the cracks, like authors like Diriye Osman, sort of a Somali writer. Sorry, that was a bit rambling.
No, that was brilliant because
yeah.
you've just mentioned quite a few. I'll tell you what, if you could repeat any of them, because Dave might be able to put them into the chat for people to look up. So yeah, just give us a list of who you think we should be looking at. Yeah, from my part, actually, I read a story that, again, what you said, Steph, really did resonate about. I don't look at the author half the time. I look at the story, so I don't really think I don't know if it's a translation until after I've picked up the story or the book. And there's one that I read last year, and it was part of a celebration that Pseudopod were doing, a 1925 showcase, and it was called The Human Chair by, I know I don't want to butcher the name, but Idegawa Ranpo, a Japanese author and critic who played a major role in the development of Japanese mystery fiction. I'm quoting verbatim from Pseudopod here, don't sue us. But I read the story, and it was originally published in Kuraku in October 1925 as Ninjanisu, I think is the pronunciation. But again, I'm very happy to be corrected here. And it was amazing. And I didn't know it was a Japanese author until after I'd read the story. And it borders that very fine line between, is this a horror story or is this a contemporary, what I would class as just something you might read in a general magazine? It was amazing. That's The Human Chair by Idegawa Ranpo. And you can, I think, still read it. In fact, I can put the link in the chat because I loved it so much that I wanted to bring it here. But yeah, it's something that really has opened my eyes to so many different ways of thinking. Dave, you mentioned as well, things that I don't think about and different modes of thinking. Absolutely amazing. Thank you all for sharing that. That's really good recommendations. My next question, I know caused a bit of challenge back to me, so I did alter it. But how do we all feel, particularly in the last 20 years? Because I think it has impacted my own interaction with speculative shorts. But how has the internet in general? I know we could go off down multiple rabbit holes, and we won't. But how has the internet influenced your own interactions with speculative shorts? And has it opened your eyes to any new stories you doubt you ever would have heard of before? Kenechi?
Right. Interestingly, I read a lot more sci-fi online than I ever did physical form. So the internet has been a huge gateway for me anyway, for sci-fi speculative shorts, because and fantasy, horror, everything together, because I would probably never on my own go off and look for horror. Even though I like watching horror stuff, I would probably not go and look for horror, but I would read online quickly, like a horror short story, because it's there. And in the past, if I would have bought any anthologies or any short story collections, by one author, I would have probably bought fantasy. But the internet has actually made it possible for me to read so many things and so many other genres that I would not have even thought of. And I think as well, the fact that there's so much more content out there in the world generally. I mean, you couldn't get them all in book form anyway. So I think that's a positive, because you couldn't potentially get all that material out in book form, even if everyone decided to print out, at home. So the internet is, for me, it's a good place, but obviously there are negatives, which we will talk about, I'm sure. I'm just trying to look at the positives of the internet.
Well, I think any tool, it's a tool. I never think of technology as good or evil. I think of it's a tool. How we use it might be considered good, bad, or somewhere in between. But yeah, I mean, the internet for me has certainly opened my eyes. Dave?
It's certainly been really good as a writer, because it allows you to connect so easily with new markets and to discover new markets. In general, social media, though, I'm doing it less and less, because over the years I come to realize it makes me unhappy. So the less I go there, the happier I am. And obviously, the way the world works, there's a sort of compromise you've got to make about that. It's been really good for the resurgence of short form writing. I don't think Facebook and Twitter are very good for discovery in general, or in fact for promotion. Certainly for fiction, though I've heard people say, though I've no experience of it, that it's pretty good for non-fiction. I think word of mouth is still one of the best ways to find out about good stories, and to a degree about good markets.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. And particularly on the social media point, I closed my Twitter account last year, despite knowing that a lot of fiction, speculative and otherwise authors, writers, editors, agents are on there. It was for my own mental health more than anything else. I wasn't enjoying it. And if I'm not enjoying it, it's really not going to help me. And I've never discovered many stories on it anyway, but Anna, how do you feel about this?
I think for me, as someone, I guess, who was trying to find my home a couple of years ago, trying to figure out, like, do I do more literary? Do I do more spec-fic? Because I like everything. It's kind of hard to choose. And for me, it's the access the communities, which has been so life-changing for me, which it creates, in turn, creates opportunities for everything else, whether it's to get to know open calls or get to know, just understanding a little bit more which market's looking for what type of stories. Those kinds of conversations are so useful. So for me, it's all communities that I've found, and not on social media technically, because actually the best places tend to be the close communities, if you can get into them or if you find where they live. And they tend to center around an author. If you like an author, you join the community, you join the conversation. So that's one bit for me that's been just massively eye-opening, that's completely changed. I won't say changed my life and the writing life for the last few years. The other stuff is all the good stuff of the internet, like research. Oh my goodness. Academic papers, like the access to academic papers for me as a science fiction writer has been phenomenal. For most things, I actually went through the more traditional methods of trying to find them in libraries, and actually the internet wins on that one.
Pick it up for libraries as well.
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, actually, there's some. So I guess libraries changed. Sorry, this is definitely a rabbit hole. So you've got the open library, which is also good. So you have just so many more options to see what else is around the world. So you're not limited to your local library. My local library is excellent, actually. I love it. But for stuff like academic papers, which maybe I'm one of those nerds that just reads stories before I write a story. I do make sure that some of my science is sound. So I do read those papers before I feel confident to write one word that means the right thing. It's been gold.
So you don't
I was gonna hop in on what Anna said just about the research, because that is I think that is real gold. The number of hours I've said, okay, I'm gonna write about this metal, and then I'll spend 2 hours researching the metal that actually all I needed was the first line, and I'm like, oh, it's fascinating. And the beauty of it all is that they're all authentic. So you know that it's probably NASA that wrote this thing and it's on the internet, So you're reading real stuff, it's not just somebody in their bedroom writing it. And so the internet has given us that, at least we can thank God for that. And actually the libraries around me are fantastic because they all have the online, you can actually get the apps, and you can still access material, obviously, if they have them. They can still, you can still use a library by accessing the material on your phone. So you're kind of supporting your library, sort of. But there you go.
No, I completely agree with everything you've all just said. It's, for me, the internet, again, I reiterate this whenever I talk about it. For me, it's neither good nor bad. It's just there. It's a tool, and it's how I choose to use it. And going down a rabbit hole on research is a dangerous, dangerous thing. I spent 3 hours the other day researching a particular moving part of an old steam locomotive train, and I was only supposed to be Googling maybe 20 minutes or so because I knew I had to get on with some other stuff. And then I looked at my watch, it's 12 o'clock. And I've just been a complete nerd about steam locomotives. Shock secret, I love trains, but for me, that's the beauty of it at the same time. And it's interesting what you said about the Twitter and Facebook and all, the other social medias, because I think perhaps it's more the way I've had a relationship with it in the past. I haven't enjoyed that, and I then need to rethink the way I approach social media in the future, if again, because Anna, you're right. I do know there's a lot of stuff you can find. Like, again, people put open calls on Twitter, and Kenechi, you've told me in the past you've found out about stuff just from going through particular hashtags or timelines. I just recently, before Christmas, I know myself well enough to know if I go on Twitter for longer than 10 or 15 minutes, I won't come off for maybe another hour. And that stops me writing, stops me reading, stops me doing anything really productive. So, but I love the research part of the internet. I think that's wholly wonderful. Although, check your sources, as I'm sure we've all found out. Always check those sources before you go ahead and use it. Actually, on that point, and I'm only going to touch on this very, very quickly because we could really disappear down a rabbit hole. We did briefly, and I know some of you don't want to talk about it, that's fine, but I will mention I did read about the problems that Clarkesworld have had with ChatGPT. the only reason I want to talk about it and get some thoughts is because I hold my hand up and I have used a similar platform called Write Sonic for work. So my day job as a digital communications officer, and purely for speed, I've used it to help us craft social media posts. That's it, just social media posts, because otherwise it would take me maybe a week to plan a content calendar ahead. So how do we feel about the AI that's coming up at the moment? And you don't have to talk about ChatGPT, because AI in general is a fascinating thing in speculative fiction anyway.
It's going to only learn from the data set that we feed it.
Yeah.
I don't know if Kenechi or Dave wants to fit in, but there's an sorry, rabbit hole warning. There is a philosopher called Mark Fisher who sadly passed recently. I want to say it's recent. I want to say in the last 5 years. So philosopher Mark Fisher, British philosopher. Just a trigger warning. Some of the stuff he says is very depressing. So if you don't want to stay away from that, that's possible. But one of the interesting points he's made is the fact that, and he talks about this in the context of music, which makes me think about. I haven't actually known. I was wondering, what does it mean for the arts in general, of writing, storytelling, the stories that we're telling to each other? He believes that there has been no real innovation in music since the early 2000s because of the internet. And all of a sudden, all our realities are clashing at once. So there's no such thing as retro anymore, because retro is the new thing. And so these are concepts philosophically of how everything just mushed together and happening all at once. And so Dave recognizes that. And it's given me food for thought. And so I think what's going to happen, and please don't, this is not a prediction. It feels like AI is just part of that cycle. It's that part of that cycle where we might end up in sort of like this eddy, or this kind of like spiral pool of, we are just going to, and I think it's already happened actually culturally to some degree in sort of pop culture. We are refeeding things that are generally mostly the same. And AI will just amplify this, because that's what it's doing. It can only learn what exists. Yeah, and it will spit out something that's a combination of things that currently exist, if that makes sense. No,
it does. But do we, this is just going fully down the speculative rabbit hole for me, but I grew up reading short stories and books that, robots, computer programs that, good or bad. And I was always interested that there were more stories about AI going wrong than stories about AI perhaps going quite well. I mean, Asimov kind of tinkered with both sides with his laws of robotics, and he wrote some really interesting short stories. Problematic author, but the concepts I found really interesting. And because I'm a huge Star Trek nerd anyway, I found just the character of Data alone in The Next Generation a much more interesting take on what artificial intelligence could be in the future. I think with the stuff that's going on, I agree with you, Anna, with the stuff that's going on at the moment, it will only give us back what we feed it. I know the concern a lot of writers have is, well, what if a writer feeds in all this stuff and then it churns out a story that cannot be detected as either, written by a human or written by a machine, basically. And my counter to that was, well, if the AI, sorry, I'm scanning way ahead here. If the AI gets to the point where we talk about it developing consciousness, why can't it tell stories? Why shouldn't it be able to tell stories in the future? I know we're a long way away from that, I think. But my only sort of advice and recommendation to people listening and watching is, don't be scared of it. Study it, embrace it. And I always think the way we choose to treat AI will determine how it interacts with us in the future. So I choose to treat it with curiosity rather than fear. But that's just me. I don't know how you feel about that.
I was going to say, I think that we have a lot of scares in life, right? I'm sure like 20 years ago, there was something, I can't remember what everything's happened in life, but 40 years ago, there was a scare about something, 20 years ago, there was a scare about something. And it's all about, as Anna was saying, things that would, things not actually changing because the internet is here, all that fear, I feel will pass. And this is me, obviously, we'll look back in 5 years and go, she was talking nonsense. But the truth is that we'll end up working with technology, whether or not we like it. So if this technology is here to stay, we can all be, as you were saying, John, we can all be a little bit integrated with it. We can either work against it or with it. And the truth is that it's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to get more intelligent and it's going to get, a lot scarier for the people who think it's scary. So we might as well just not embrace it fully, because then obviously we don't want loss of creativity in the genuine way. But yeah, we could walk with it, find a way to walk with it. I don't know how.
No, I know what you mean, and I don't think any of us have all the answers yet. Interestingly, someone has just put we've had one person put most likely it's not yet the Terminator era. Yay. And Jane has actually said, I think the problem is if people are trying to use AI to leapfrog the normal working process. There's another rabbit hole we can go down, is what do we consider the normal working process to be? And does the working process evolve, especially when it comes to storytelling? There you go. I've just opened up another whole avenue of conversation. I
thought what Anna said about music was really interesting. I've heard that before from commentators saying that there was a point beyond which we passed in which mainstream modern music, you can't actually identify the decade where it came from anymore. Whereas 60s music is 60s music, 70s music is 70s music, but at some point it became homogenous. Now that's not true about all music, because as with a lot of other genres, sometimes the good stuff just has to go underground. But the material that gets like mainstream play is kind of unidentifiable in terms of where it actually came from, which is strange and feels true. ChatGPT, I had a play with it and asked it to write a story, and it's complete rubbish. And I started to have a conversation with it, and it just enraged me. The thing that worries me most about this sort of AI is not the AI, it's us.
Yeah,
we're gullible, we're naive. This thing, when I said that's not very good, it started apologizing to me and saying, oh, I'm terribly sorry. And it doesn't know what offense is, it doesn't know what apology is, it doesn't even know what it's done. It's just reacted to something, and yet it's masquerading as something that has got feelings and has got emotions and can introspect, and none of that is true. And also, yet again, we're encouraged to behave as if it does, and none of this is true. I read somewhere recently that the great threat of AI is our own gullibility. I think that's something we need to think about an awful lot.
I think there's lots of stories to be told in this area as well that maybe haven't been told or just need to be re-explored from a speculative point of view. Yeah, there's a lot of comments agreeing with you, Dave. In fact, I can't see the name fully. You hit the nail on the head, according to one comment. So there you go. You've heard it here first, folks. All right, let's because again, we could disappear down this rabbit hole forever. Let's move away from the AI a little bit. Let's move on to some nicer things, particularly when it comes to speculative short fiction. What role, if any, have writing groups played in driving your interest in speculative short fiction? And do you feel there's a difference in what writers like versus what readers like?
Definitely.
Yep.
Just gonna kick off again. Because I personally have never been in a group that was specifically speculative fiction, so it's always been quite interesting to be in an open group, and then you get when you speak to people, they also, people that don't read speculative fiction look at you funny, because they're like, okay, that's okay. And so it's quite nice to be in writing groups just generally, because then you get different opinions on something that you think that everyone that has a sci-fi fantasy mind will get, and everyone else, you kind of get a different perspective from them, and it's very helpful. So I definitely think writing groups are great. Just I suspect that it's nicer to not actually be in a speculative fiction writing group, just for that reason.
Interesting. No, that's interesting.
I like that. So,
ooh, Dave, Anna, how do you feel about that? Just coming off the back of what Kenechi said, particularly because we are in speculative writing groups.
I know. Sorry.
I don't know. I've only ever been in one non-speculative group, and it was kind of a vanity writing group, and it wasn't for me. But the main groups I've been in, the Tea Party and now Spectrum, they've played a huge part in my writing life, from the support I've got from people when you're just going through a tough time, when you're losing confidence in your own ability to actually be a writer, and also the feedback and criticism and critique and things. They've been really, really good for me. Yeah, I think writers are very interested in different things to readers, and I think it makes us in some ways quite poor critics about what is a good story for a reader. I can say what's a good story for this writer, because it's difficult for me to turn off my sort of deconstructive brain as I read something and say, oh, this is really good, I love what they've done there, as opposed to just reading the damn story. But when that happens, I know I found something really, really special, and I just love that moment when I realize I've been reading this book for like 3 or 4 hours and I haven't had a single thought about from my writerly brain, and that's just a blessing when it happens.
Yeah. Anna?
For me, I love what Kenechi said. This is really weird. I think when I was still trying to figure out what kind of writer I am, I struggled in a group that was not speculative fiction only, because everyone looks at you weird, was like, what do you mean building a world? What do you mean this sign things? And you have to explain quite a lot of different things, and you ended up, I think my worry was that if I did that, I would just have lots and lots of exposition in my story because I have to explain so much. And to some degree, I felt like where I have been, I needed groups of people around me that was writing spec fic, because we have that sort of sense for shorthands and understand what's okay in the genre. We know what else is out there. However, when I have critique partners, I appreciate critique partners who read a wide variety of things, precisely because I feel like when I write my story, like the sort of reading I have, I straddle the literary genre a little bit, just naturally. Maybe that's because where my roots are from. But so yeah, I feel like maybe I should take on Kenechi's path and try out something less focused on spec fic, just to broaden my horizons.
Well,
and if it doesn't work for you, then you move back to where you came from. That's the worst that could happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, Kenechi and I met on a group that was not speculative fiction at all. In fact, they were so far away from speculative fiction. Didn't we end up co-running it for a bit as well?
Yeah, we did for a few years. Yeah.
We should have changed it into speculative fiction,
exactly.
But no, I mean,
now
it was
out the door.
It was interesting though, because you did see a wide variety of different stories, and I know we all read. We don't just read in the speculative side. We read everything. I know we've all done that, and we continue to do that. That's why I really enjoy talking with you all. But that, and obviously you're lovely people too. But for me, when it comes to the writing groups, they have really helped me as well. But at the moment, I think I fall down. I've just seen a comment from Jane again. One of her favorite writing groups is a speculative writing group, because they're so open to all forms of writing without judgment, she feels. Do Do you agree with that, Kenechi?
Well, I get that point, because actually I think speculative fiction writers, because we're so open to any possibility, we would accept, someone that comes in with what we would not, just a contemporary story. I mean, not that anyone would show up with a contemporary story, but I from that point of view, I get that. But what I've found with specifically, speculative minded people is that we will dig too deep into the thing. So where it's from the other point of view, it's, oh, what is this world? And then somebody that knows about, vampires, for example, will be like, oh no, but he didn't drink the blood, right? And you're like, no, you can drink the blood 7 different ways, And we're like, no, that's not what we know about that. And you're like, maybe we need to move away from what we know. So that's the danger as well, that you get people that know what they know and then want you to write what they know, which it's not always the best way to develop juices and everything.
I completely agree, and it's something I'm always keeping at the back of my head when it comes to writing groups, that I can be that person who just goes into way too much detail on a critique for a fellow writer, and actually I should have stepped back in the first place and said, well, actually it doesn't matter how many different ways he's just done this, that, or whatever. Is the story good? Does it engage me? Is the speculative element essential to it? I think that's the only question I probably ask. Could this story work without that element in it? But maybe I shouldn't go any further than that. It's too dangerous. We got a lot of love, actually, particularly from Jane. Again, I love speculative writing groups, such a spectrum. Although that said, I have participated in a lot of writing courses, and I do think that on the back of Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, people are becoming more accepting of speculative fiction. That's a whole question there. How do we feel do we agree with Jane on that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Partly because I think a lot of people that watched and, I wouldn't say read Game of Thrones, that watched Game of Thrones didn't even think about it as speculative fiction. I mean, there were dragons flying around, but people that say, oh, I don't like fantasy, were watching Game of Thrones and invested in how many other seasons there were, but they would generally say, oh, I don't like fantasy. So that actually has really helped. And I suspect that a lot of, I'm going to use Netflix as an example, a lot of Netflix shows now as well that are quite popular. I mean, Stranger Things, those type of shows that people, again, are buying into that world of unrealistic things. But not actually calling themselves fantasy fans. I mean, you would meet hundreds of people who will go, oh, I really do not watch horror. But Stranger Things is a little bit horror.
Stranger Things is a horror. It's basically
it pretty much is. Yeah, so there you
go. Oh, and and you're right, Steph, like The Expanse as well. People don't consider themselves science fiction fans, but they will quite cheerfully quote The Expanse at me. So, yeah, completely agree. All right, we might have gone a bit too far away from the core bit here. Actually, we all do. We've just said we read widely, one assumes. Are there any genres, though, that we veer more towards at the moment? Or are there any in the past that maybe you really, really enjoyed but no longer enjoy?
I read a lot of non-fiction at the moment. And I'm drawn towards that more and more because it often comes out of research. I spend my 10 minutes on Google looking up one thing becomes 3 hours, and by then I've found half a dozen books that I want to read about that subject, and I'll pick one. And I don't know why, but non-fiction is becoming more interesting.
Have you got any favorite non-fics that you've been reading at the moment?
Where I've been delving at the moment is over the last few months is Max Hastings books, mainly about Second World War. I spent far too much of my life reading about the Second World War. Mainly because my dad was in it, I think, and I tried. It's part of my efforts to try and understand him. But it's become just a fascination, and it's also kind of a fascination now with what's going on in Eastern Europe. To compare what countries were then to what they are now, and so on. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Kenechi, anything that you're really veering towards at the moment outside of speculative fiction?
No, well, I read really widely. That's just the truth. And if I'm being really honest, I actually probably read a lot less speculative fiction, strangely, just because I read everything else. And sometimes especially when I'm writing, I don't like to have my work influenced by something that is so similar. And if I'm writing in a slightly soppy scene, I sometimes want to read a really soppy book, because then it gets me in the headspace, and that might not necessarily be, it's magic, right? You're not feeling a romantic scene and you read a romantic book, and then you're like, okay, I have this now. Someone's going to hold someone's hand and it will be fine.
Well, on that point, Kenechi, someone did put in the chat, even Bridgerton is arguably slipstream.
Well, actually that is very valid point. It is very valid, but yeah, I mean, I personally tend to read everything else, and it does help influence your speculative fiction, well, my speculative fiction writing, because I just feel like, I mean, you're writing in the real world. I mean, yes, it might not actually be the real world in the sense that you might be on a different planet or you might be in a different realm, but it's still more often than not about relationships and people. And you get that from other material. So yeah.
Anna?
Yeah, I read everything, I think. I mean, I just talked about like reading research papers for breakfast, but I mean, I read all things all the time simultaneously. Well, not exactly so to say. And I think I always have, and I've probably just gotten worse when I got older, I think. So usually I'll have something literary on the go. I might be rereading something that I read, like I said, I was rereading The Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. So I may have a speculative short story anthology generally. That's probably about that. What I keep buying, because I've got friends and fellow writers who've got stuff published that I love to read, and sometimes they're only available in paper form or whatever.
Yeah.
And then let's not forget all the stuff in there we're critiquing for our critique partners.
Yeah.
But mostly, I seem to, like Dave, I read a lot of nonfiction and a whole lot of scientific papers.
Yeah. And well, no, to echo all of you, I don't just read spec fic. I read, in fact, I'm reading two books two about all I can manage at the moment. Sometimes I read more, but I'm reading a Patrick Gale novel, and I think he's been around for years now. His stories are pretty much family dramas, essentially, usually with a queer lead, and he's just a really good storyteller. No speculative elements in them at all, but I highly recommend him as an author just to study anyway if you're interested, because I think he's great. But then from my spec side, I'm also reading, I think it's the 6th book in the Expanse series at the moment, which I bizarrely got into from the TV show. I've done it the other way round, and I find the books, I know the writers did both, so I'm sure they won't mind me saying, but I think the books are better. And I love the TV show, but I think the books are really, really engaging and interesting. And I was reading a third, short stories. I've been reading a lot of those recently, but also rom-coms in Women's Weekly and stuff like that, mainly because I find them quite fluffy and fun. I have to admit, I love romantic comedies. I always have. So I will cheerfully read I will read anything that's a rom-com all the time. And by the way, guys write rom-coms too. Lots of guys. Probably and this might be controversial, but one of the most prolific romantic comedy writers is probably Kevin Smith. He might not identify as rom-com, but if you look at his films and his stories, that's romantic comedy, a lot of it, and it's great. He deals with everything. He's wonderful. Nothing wrong with rom-coms, Jane says. Look at Jane Austen. Very, very true. Excellent.
I always feel...
Sorry, go for it.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to butt in and say, I think like if everybody read romance, we would have nicer human beings to each other. because they teach us so much about relationships, aren't they?
Yep.
So yes.
Although my
We have a
wife might
question, I think,
disagree.
in the-
Oh no, go for it.
Oh, we have
Sorry.
a question in the panel actually. So sorry, in the little chat box thing. I don't know whether we want to take that now or later.
Oh yeah, there's a question there. Yes, yes.
In the
major turn-off.
nothing in my chat box.
Shall I read it out to you?
How about you read it out?
What is the? I'll read it out. What is a major turn-off for you in a short story? For example, short stories written across a wide time frame by Piers Livingston. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Do you mind if I answer that one first? For me, if the story is not started, and it's difficult to articulate, but if a story takes more than a page to gain my interest, I'm done. I don't have time, basically. And that sounds awful, because when I'm critiquing work, I will make the time, but I will also say to people, look, this didn't grab me until, page 2, page 3. I think you need to start. What is a real turn off is the story just doesn't start until page 2, 3, 4, sometimes later. And it's like, well, what's the point? If this is a short story, when's the story actually going to start? Massive turn off for me. I just put it away. And I bet your bottom dollar, having spoken to many editors, they don't have time either. So if you cannot grab them within the first couple of lines, you're done.
Okay, that's similar to what publishers and agents say about longer work, because they always say if you send the first 3 chapters, if we're not hooked by the first 3 chapters, then what's the point of reading the rest of the book? So it's a similar, obviously short fiction is, it's a short version of a long story. So if you're not grabbing someone from page 1 and it's only 10 pages, then you've kind of lost them already. But my turn off for spec tends to be, I'm not a big fan of literary fiction. So I'm sorry, Hannah, but I'm not a big fan of that. So when the words are all a bit too fluffy and I'm just thinking, I just wanted something snappy. That's just the way my brain works. And it's beautiful, but I didn't want that. That's just the way my brain works. And I think if you pick up something short, then just get to the point. That's just me. Yeah.
Do you concur, Dave? I can see you nodding.
No, absolutely. I really don't like stories that stop rather than end. That just never reach a conclusion. They're just there, or they have punchlines. I've done that myself in the past, and it was wrong, and I don't do it again. I don't like that. Stories written across a wide time frame, I'm very cool with that. I've read some great short stories that have had huge reach across time and space, and they've been really engaging. I think the things that bug me, and it was probably going back to writers looking for different things to readers perhaps, but it's the treatment. If the treatment doesn't work, then I'm not engaged. I'm not there. I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I'll start picking holes.
Yeah. Guilty, but you've done it to me often enough, Dave. So I've been hardened that I appreciated it all the time. Okay, we are as good as you get. Yeah, no, I know, but we're very nice about it. I think we're running a bit short on time. So if there are any questions due to come in, please do pop them in the chat now. We've got about 10 minutes left. Here we go. Regarding the link between short form and long form, I think what you learn from a short form structure is incredibly useful for novel writing, but is not necessarily a guaranteed slam dunk in terms of transitional application. Something to think about. Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, whilst we've got a little bit of time there, so let's move on to just some fun things to wrap it up with. Has there ever been a speculative short that actually inspired you to write your own? By the way, these can be good or bad.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yes, definitely. That's Lundell's story. I just wanted to write something with that vibe. And about 40 years after I first read that story, I did write one, and David Ricks at Ebenvale published it as Third Instar, and it's a short novella. But yeah, I've also been inspired by stories that I thought, oh, you've just so missed the point here, and I could tell this story properly, and I'm now going to show you. I suppose that's really bad, isn't it? Because you're saying, you haven't written the story I wanted to read. I wanted you to write. Paul Gallico's Snow Goose. I wrote a fantasy version of that with dragons in it. And that was great. That was great just to use that as an inspiration. So yeah, good and bad. And lyrics, while we're on the subject of inspiration, lyrics from songs, hugely inspirational in terms of just creative ideas.
Kenechi?
Right. So the only book I can think of, or short story I can think of, is I read Neil Gaiman's Fragile. Is it Fragile Things? Years and years ago. It's a short story collection, and that was, I think my mind went, oh yeah, just from different stories in that book, and I think that was one of my early short story pushes. Not that I thought I could do better, but it just felt like, okay, you can tell stories cleverly, and they'll be engaging in this form. So that was like a good positive prompt. And obviously then went on to read more of his books from that, because I never actually read a Neil Gaiman book. So that's an example of short stories leading you to somebody else's other work. So yeah, so it made me read him more, made me write more. So
Gaiman always comes up at some point. Anna?
I don't know whether it's inspired me to write, but it's certainly one of the ones that I could identify as one of the first speculative short stories I've ever read. Is The Machine Stops by Ian Foster. Good old classic, which, kind of for me predicts down with the internet and what happens. But in my head, I'm keeping that in mind. You've got to know how to fix the internet.
That's the gauntlet laid down. Know how to fix the internet. Yeah, for me, I think A Study in Emerald by Gaiman was quite good for me. I thought that was a really clever spin on Sherlock Holmes, and that made me think, oh, you can tell a good story in short form. In fact, this relates to a question that has come in, because we have got just a couple of minutes left. Should short stories have a smaller cast? Emphatic nods from all panelists around us.
Yes.
And for the uninitiated, Dave, why should they have smaller casts?
It's a smaller story.
Ask a silly question, get a silly answer.
No, seriously. I mean, there's a rule of thumb: 1 character per 1,000 words. I don't know whether that's it's a guideline. I think fundamentally it goes back to the idea that a short story is the exploration of a single idea, a single theme. And you're working through that theme. You don't have room to do a Neil Stevenson and write a spare 50,000 words about somebody's CV just because you're interested in it. You've got to stay focused on that, and therefore you need a small number of protagonists who can drive that single idea forwards. Too many characters will rapidly become incoherent. Also, you're introducing them really fast. If you've got a 3,000 word short story with 20 characters, you're going to be pushing them into the story at a real rate of knots. And if you're me, your brain won't be able to keep up with all these characters. You won't know who they are and where they're related.
Yep. Totally agree.
I want to say in speculative fiction, yes, because you've got that extra word count you need for world building. However, in the literary world, you've got examples of much bigger cast and a small amount of words. And one of the stories I can think about is Call of Rose for Emily by Faulkner. It's an interesting story structurally because it's like every single sort of scene is actually a different voice, and you see the viewpoint of the community telling a story, which for me is actually a really good exercise and how we can borrow from literary structures to think about how we be telling stories more creatively in specfic.
Yeah. Yep. And
yeah,
I'm just going to echo what everyone's already said here. Smaller story equals smaller cast. You don't have the time to muck around, basically. Right, unfortunately, we are just about coming to time. For some reason, I thought we had another half an hour, but no, that's fine by me. I'm sure we've all got other things to be getting on with. If there are any more questions, please do pop them in the chat. Even if we can't answer them here, we will do our very best to get back to you on any that we can. Just a few closing housekeeping notes before I say thank you to our panelists is we do have a merch shop. So I'm going to pop this in the Zoom chat, or hopefully the tech can pop that in the Zoom chat for me. We should, I hope, have an all-consuming presence and possibly a fan table at EasterCon, which I think is taking place in Birmingham this year, and some upcoming events for Glasgow 2024 Presents to put in your diary on Thursday, the 16th of March at 7 p.m. GMT. Glasgow 2024 presents The Road to Publication. I think that is on sale now, so you can get your tickets for all that. And on Monday, the 24th of April at 7 p.m. British summertime, because the clocks will be going forward here at the end of March, Glasgow 2024 presents Chinese SFFH. That's sci-fi, fantasy and horror. That's one I'm particularly fascinated to go to because I don't know that much about Chinese science fiction, fantasy and horror. So, put that in your diary. Please keep your eyes open on our socials for lots of exciting announcements as we march on towards Glasgow 2024 next year. And if you enjoyed this event, please do consider volunteering for Glasgow 2024. We're always on the lookout for enthusiastic people with a passion for science fiction, fantasy, horror, and stories, basically, because that's what we all love, as hopefully this panel has demonstrated to you. And just a warm, friendly reminder, you don't have to be an expert to help out. So, please look at our website, glasgow2024.org, and you will find us, and please put your name down. Before we leave, I just want to say a great thank you to our panelists today. That's Kenechi Udogu, Anna Sun, and David Gullen. You can find links to their websites and their socials on our YouTube channel. And I think, to close us out before we leave, does anyone have a favorite speculative short they want to recommend before we go? It's fine if not, but might as well go out as we started.
I don't do favorites. So no.
Nice save.
I'm looking through my notes. Where are we? Very quickly. Where is it? There's a story in Best of British SF 2021 by Tim Major called The Android, and I thought that was outstanding. That's a great story. Yeah,
fantastic.
Kind of story I thought, I wish I'd written that, but I couldn't.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I don't have any on top of my head. I'm just a little bit tired, but I'll probably have 15 that I thought I should have said tomorrow morning. Thank you all once again. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the event. If you did, please do share on your social channels, #Glasgow 2024. But that's all from us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.